Look at those. Just get ready to fill it. Good morning and welcome to Teal House Farm. We have a very tired baby here. Just woke up.
Pantry.
Yeah. And we are going to show you today how to make one of my favorite home canned things, and that is baked beans. Home canning baked beans is a little bit of a long process. It takes pretty much all day from start to finish. It's 7 hours. Most of that is you not doing anything hours, but it is one of the most delicious things in our pantry, and I love making a big batch once a year, and then we just have baked beans on the shelf. It's way cheaper than buying cans of baked beans at the store, and I think that they even taste better. So the first thing we have to do is prep our beans for baking, and so we're going to pour them in a big pot of water, bring it to a boil for 2 minutes, turn the heat off, cover it, and just let it sit for an hour. We are going to use navy beans in a bag like this. Costs probably about 99 cents at your local Walmart. And I'm going to use about 7 pounds. That should make me 18 to 20 pints of baked beans. You can also put these in quarts if you want to. But we are going to can pint jars because that's how I use them the most. Let's get that started, and then I'll show you all the ingredients you need for baking the beans to make the sauce.
No.
Okay, so got the water in there, filled this up about halfway. You also want to rinse your beans, so just put them in a colander, rinse them under the water, and then dump them in the pot, and then we're going to get it boiling. That's what 7 pounds of beans looks like. You can use any kind of white bean. I usually use a navy bean. I was a little short on navy, so I did a mixture of navy and Great Northern. It's still going to be a great product. You really won't notice the difference other than some of your beans are going to be slightly larger. Navy beans are the size that we're used to in the canned beans that you get at the store, so that's what I typically use. So bring it to a boil, 2 minutes, then we're gonna just turn the heat off and let them sit. I usually cover it. I don't think you actually have to. It doesn't really make a difference. It just sits here in the hot water for an hour. And then we are gonna drain it, and I'm going to use a large roasting pan in the oven to cook the beans with the sauce for 4 to 5 hours. Okay, let me show you what we need to make the sauce. You're gonna need a large pan. I'm going to use my roasting pan, which is extra big. And then obviously you're going to need lots of jars for later. So I've got a whole bunch already cleaned and sanitized. For the sauce, we need some sort of flavoring meat. So I like to use the cured ends from when I buy the whole hog. I don't have anything else that I use them. So this is a great way to take something that most people would tell the butcher they don't want and to turn it from waste to a useful product. You could also just use chopped bacon, chopped ham. I think some people have used pork bones or pork hocks before. I think that the cured ends, though, give it the best flavor, and it's also a useful way to use something that you really wouldn't use otherwise. You will need some salt. You will need some yellow dried mustard. You need some dark molasses. I use blackstrap molasses. You could use just the dark molasses, like the Granny's dark molasses. That's fine too. If you can't find that, you can actually just use regular molasses as well. And then you need a little bit of vinegar. And I apologize, everyone has decided that they need to stand in the kitchen right now, so that's why you hear all the noise and the little voices.
Can I help?
Okay, Ivy is here to help me make the sauce. So we are making a double batch of the sauce because we're using so many beans. So if you are using fewer beans, you want to cut this in half probably. Though it's always better to make too much than too little because you just don't have to go back and do it again. Okay, so double batch should cover it though. So we are going to need 8 cups of water. And what I usually do is use some of the reserve from the beans just to not be wasteful, and then the rest from the sink. our 2 pans, and we brought our sauce to a boil, and we preheated the oven to 350 degrees. So now we are going to spread our sauce between the 2 pans. And I'm actually going to go ahead and make one more small batch of the sauce to do this little pan. So I'm going to put the double batch in this big pan, and then a small half batch of that sauce in this little pan. And then we're going to put them in the oven at 350 degrees, and we're going to cook them for 4 to 5 hours. We're going to check them every hour, make sure they aren't too dry, and we will add more liquid if we need to.
Bye-bye. Let's try swimming.
I have the water in my pressure canner warming up. You want it hot but not boiling when you add the jars. And I have my lids getting ready to simmer back there. I am keeping the beans warm here because I'm using the oven to warm my jar back up. Warming your clean and sanitized jars in the oven is kind of a hot topic in the canning community. People say that it could damage the integrity of the jars. You're more likely to have an exploded jar in the canner. In my 4 years of canning, and I can hundreds of jars a year, I've only ever had one jar explode, and I reuse them over and over again. So I feel like warming the jars back up in the oven works just fine. The best thing to do is, if you have a dishwasher, is you clean, sanitize in the dishwasher, and then you leave your dishwasher door closed until you're ready to can. It keeps the jars really hot. But I don't have a dishwasher, so that's not an option. The other option is to boil the jars on the stove for 10 minutes. That's a sanitizing process, and then immediately can them. Problem is, I don't have enough room on my stove for a big enough pot to do enough jars for a full canner load, and so it just doesn't work out. So for me, this is the best deal, and I've never had a problem with it. But I just wanted to put that out there for people who are maybe new to canning and trying this, to let you know that what I'm doing right here with how I warm my jars up is not always the preferred method or the most recommended method. I'll show you what they look like. This is the beans. Still got water almost all the way to the top. Evaporated some more, but again, we've been adding water through the cooking process. These look great. So let's get our jars out and let's get canning. The only thing that's special about canning baked beans, or what I like to do, is I will fill the first few jars almost all the way to the top. Leave a little extra room so I can get to the bottom of the pot and start accessing those pieces of the bacon ends. And I try to make sure I have one in every jar. Just makes the final product a little bit better to try to have one bacon end in every jar. And then you want to try to get enough beans and liquid and your piece of bacon end in there and fill it with 1-inch headspace. And then we're going to wipe the rims with a clean, damp cloth, and then put the lids and the rings on, and then in the canner they go. One of the big canning questions that I feel like I get a lot is, what do I do if I have too much for one batch in my canner? So this recipe, I have way too much for one batch in my canner. I have 16 jars in there now, and I think it's actually going to end up making more like 25 or 26 jars by the time we're done here. So underestimated that a little bit, but definitely going to have to run a second canner load. So there are a couple safety things to keep in mind. You need to keep everything hot, or you need to reheat everything to basically boiling hot before loading your second set of jars. Don't load your second set of jars until you're ready to put them in the canner. So I'm going to run the canner, let it cool down, empty it out, and then I'm going to load my next set of jars and put them in. You don't want your stuff cooling down to lukewarm in the jars. Not only could your jars explode when you put them in the canner if they cool down too much, you also are in danger of creating a nice environment for bacteria to develop. So for the baked beans, because they can cook for such a long time anyway, and we're just at the very beginning of the recommended cooking time at that like 4.5 hours, I'm just going to put it back in the oven and keep monitoring, make sure it has enough liquid, and run the canner. And then when the canner's done, I'm just going to go ahead and do what I just did. For other things, say like a chicken broth, you could cool it all the way down, put it in the fridge, and then bring it back to boiling the next day and do a second load in the canner. Or you could just leave it boiling with the lid on, or leave it simmering and then bring it back to boil. Important part is that you get it back up to that super hot boiling temperature when you're ready to load your jars again. Ta-da! We are done. Okay, that did make 24 pints of baked beans. One thing I did forget to mention is you will notice that even after all that cooking and sitting in the hot water and then 4 to 5 hours of baking, when you're canning your beans, that your beans still are not soft. That's how you want them, because the canning process is going to finish cooking your beans into a nice cooked but still firm baked bean, so you don't end up with a sludge when you open your can. So you do not want a fully cooked baked bean to go into your jars to be canned, because if you do that, it's just going to be a hot mess when you try to eat them next. It's just going to be like mush. Now when you use these baked beans, you'll notice that the flavor is pretty basic. This is a baked bean base. I like them just like this, but I also like to add flavoring depending on what I'm in the mood for. So sometimes I add a little bit of brown sugar, sometimes I add a little bit of maple syrup. My favorite thing to do is to add a little bit of my homemade spiced pear jam. I'll link the recipe for that below. It is like the best baked bean you've ever had. You get the nice molassesy baked bean, you get the sweetness of the pears and the jam, and a kick of spice because the spiced pear jam has some clove in it, so just great. That's probably Sam's favorite way to have them as well. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you soon.